Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second annual spring virtual conference. We are so happy to have you join us. We're right smack dab in the middle of the session. We've had a lot of great ones, a lot of great interactions and comments. So thank you all who have been asking questions and really getting in there and contributing. We appreciate it. And so do all of our session presenters. So we also want to make a huge thank you to Travel Nurse Across America for being this year's spring virtual conference. Be sure to check out their jobs on our website. They have a lot of great ones out there right now. All you got to do is just go to thegypsynurse.com, go to the job board and filter Travel Nurse Across America, and you'll be able to find all of their wonderful, great jobs on there. So be sure to check that out. This year's virtual conference, if you don't already know, is the Peaks and Valleys of Travel Nursing, which all of you have been through your peaks and valleys, especially these past 2 years. So thank you all so much for everything that you do. We can never thank you enough. We just want to be an ongoing support for you. So what's better than giving some giveaways during our virtual conference? Each day we will be giving away a $50 Amazon gift card or a Gypsy Nurse tumbler with a $25 Starbucks gift card for anybody that registers for any events. So even if you can't attend, still register. You're still going to get some great information. We'll also give away a $100 Amazon gift card or a $150 Amazon gift card. So we're going to be giving 2 giveaways for people that are commenting in the comment section, asking questions. So be sure to get in the comment section. We already selected their winners. They've been contacted. So good job, everybody out there, and good luck to the rest of you. If you can't attend all the sessions, be sure to register, like I said before. Once they've been published on thegypsynurse.com, you'll get a notification saying that it's ready to go. So you can watch them, share them with your friends, whatever you need to do with them, you can do that. If you're not already a registered member, why not? We have so many great deals and promotions and benefits on there. You can get CEs from Elite Learning, access on-demand events like our previous virtual conferences and other live events. You can set up content, job, and event alerts and connect and communicate with other travel nurses. So all that great stuff is all on thegypsynurse.com, so be sure to register. You'll be the first to know about all of our events going on. So, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to our CEO, Steve Curtin. He has a few words to say.
Hey, Rachel, great to see you again. And before I get started, I just want to clarify once again, I'll give this another try. As I understand it from earlier, I am not eligible to win any of these prizes or gifts,
No,
right?
we gotta save them. We gotta save them for the travel nurses. So.
You're so firm in that. You're so, precise and firm in that, saying that was just a big no. So, all right. Well, I may try again at some other point. But listen, it's great to see you again. And as you said, we're halfway through the conference, and I'm so pleased and grateful for all of our presenters. We've really had a fantastic conference, and we have some great sessions coming up, including our next presenter, Ron Blake. But I would just like to welcome everybody to our second annual spring conference. It has just been a fantastic event, and we're very grateful and privileged to be bringing these presenters to you. Before we begin, I do want to take a moment to thank all the travel nurses and travel healthcare professionals out there that really over the past 2 years have gone through an awful lot. With the pandemic, as we all know, it's really been a tremendous burden on the healthcare system, and nurses and other travel healthcare professionals have been on the front lines, and they've gone through an awful lot. So really from our team to the travel healthcare professional community, we'd just like to say thank you, and we're very grateful for what you've done and what you continue to do. I would also like to thank our sponsor, TNAA, as Rachel mentioned, a great company to work with. They've got a lot of fantastic opportunities, and if you're interested in traveling with them, you can visit their jobs on our website, thegypsynurse.com. Finally, I do have a public service announcement, actually, and I had mentioned this in other sessions in the conference, but speaking of travel nursing, we recently undertook a big study within the travel nursing community. We engaged a third-party market research firm to survey travel nurses. We actually received over 1,000 completed surveys, so it's quite a big number there. And the asked nurses about their experiences in traveling over the past 2 years. where they're currently at in terms of their mental health, in terms of where they think their careers are headed and so forth. So we took this information, we're working with a third-party market research firm, and we are compiling this into a publicly available report. And that report will be the voice of travel nursing, and it will be available towards the end of May. So we're going to keep everybody updated on that. That will be available to members of our community, the media, and what have you. But we really think that, particularly with everything going on over the past 2 years, this is going to be a very interesting report, and hopefully can impact the overall healthcare system for the better in general. So I do want to mention that. So with that said, Rachel, I'd love to bring our guest on, Ron Blake.
Yes, definitely. We'll go ahead and bring on Ron. This is going to be a powerful session. He will be sharing his experience on how he was diagnosed with PTSD, which a lot of you may not already know this, but some of you might have PTSD and you don't know. So he's going to share his story and hope that he can show you what's beyond the bad stuff from PTSD. So I'm going to go ahead and bring on Ron so he can get started. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Ron.
Steve and Rachel, hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. I know the nurses definitely need to hear about this because they've had a rough couple of years, and even years before they've had, PTSD, experience happen to them. So I will let you guys get started.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Ron, it's great to see you. And again, we're truly grateful to have you donate your time to our community. I think you have a very impactful story, and it's a story that's going to help a lot of nurses out there. As I was mentioning at the beginning, certainly travel healthcare professionals and travel nurses in particular face a lot of stress. The theme of this conference is the peaks and valleys of travel nursing, and certainly there are a lot of valleys, within healthcare. And these nurses have experienced a lot of valleys and a lot of down moments, particularly over the past couple of years. There's been so many tragedies, so much death, so much loss. And we hear constantly in our Facebook network discussion group, and as we talk to nurses about their mental health and what they're facing, and really how many of them feel hopeless, and they're very discouraged, and they're wondering, even with this pandemic hopefully ending, how they can recover and move forward. And one of the reasons that, you and I talked a few months ago, and you were gracious enough to be willing to be a guest, in this conference, but we talked a few months ago about the fact that many nurses are mentioning PTSD. So as they're communicating with each other and they're communicating with their healthcare professionals and so forth, they're wondering, do I have PTSD? What is it? My life has changed. My relationships are changed. Things just aren't the same. Something is wrong. So I wanted to invite you to this conference so that you can speak about your experience, talk a little bit about PTSD, what you do, and really how, at the end of the day, the Gypsy Nurse is about helping people. So, how can your story help people? So again, we're grateful to have you. I know the, people joining are very excited to hear what you have to say. So just to start out, Ron, I'm wondering if you could, introduce yourself in terms of your role at the American PTSD Association, and tell us a little bit about your story.
Yes, thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm really appreciative that you, Rachel, Shannon, at the Gypsy Nurse, you guys allowed me to do this, because if I would have taken my life with my struggles with PTSD several years ago, obviously I wouldn't be here today. So when people ask me, they say, "Oh my gosh, are you ever nervous to speak in front of people?" I guess I'm human, so I'm going to be nervous, but it's also tempered by the fact that I'm alive. If I was dead, I wouldn't, I would do anything to be nervous. But so I think really just having an opportunity to speak, it makes me happy. So I'm appreciative that you guys are listening. With the American PTSD Association, it was really one of those moments that I found them online about 2 years ago, I guess it was. And the founder, Amir, I was talking with him and said, "Hey, is there any way that I can help? Can I get involved?" And I became the director of the organization. And now, in a lot of ways, how I help the organization is I do this. I really speak out a lot. Oftentimes it is by sharing your story. And but my story is really the story of, we'll find out, probably a lot of traveling nurses. Even though I'm not a traveling nurse, I'm a human being. And as I was telling you and Rachel earlier, I learned more about nurses in the last couple of weeks because what all of you don't know is the discussion I just had was I was hospitalized on St. Patrick's Day with blood clots in my legs and all throughout my lungs. It was a really dangerous situation that they immediately put me in the intensive care unit. So I really worked a lot for those 5 days in the hospital with just dozens of nurses. And as a lot of you know, as traveling nurses in general, when you're in the ICU, you get a lot of extra attention because you need it. And it wasn't all bad. When I was in the hospital, I was the only person on that unit, and there were a lot of people that was not intubated. So when the nurses actually came in, and the doctors later on said, the only way that they figured out that I was breathing on my own is because I have it's called a high VO2 max. And I've been a runner for many, many years. And they said, you have an incredible ability to breathe better than most people. So when the nurses came in to talk with me, they said that that's actually what surprised them. They could actually talk with me. And the nurses said it was just, I was sort of like an object of a lot of attention on that unit, because they said that normally they're listening to all these beeps and buzzes and alarms, and they're not dealing with human beings where they're engaging with them like the talking. And they said sometimes that takes a big toll on them. You're just watching somebody. In some cases, you're watching them go to their death, and they have no way to say any of their last words. So I'm only bringing all this up because I learned a lot in the last couple of weeks. And even being sent out of the hospital afterwards, I've had a lot of doctors and nurses I've had to work with at doctors' offices. So I'm getting a better understanding as to a lot of the mental health care challenges that nurses are facing. Because once I told them that I was going to be having this presentation today, they all had something that they wanted to tell me. And several of those nurses that helped me were traveling, and they said, this is so cool that you're going to do this. And I feel like they felt like I became the voice for them. So I'll do the best I can to maybe help all of you. Because my goal is not just to sit up here and talk and tell my story if it doesn't help you. And I want something to have a takeaway for all of you out there. So even when this is done, the hope is that maybe you can still find ways to contact me, because some of you may not see this until a week, 2 weeks, a month after this presentation, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and we're gonna make this presentation, Ron, available on demand. So registered members of the gypsynurse.com will be able to access it. And as we had talked earlier, we're going to put your contact information on the screen through a scroll. So we're going to make sure that people have ways to get in touch with you. I'm wondering, Ron, if we could start out, if you could tell us a little bit about your personal story and your journey to the American PTSD Association. You had a personal experience and some things that occurred that caused you, unfortunately, to suffer PTSD and PTSD symptoms. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind sharing.
No, and I think it's, to some of you, it's going to get better. I'm going to tell this story. I have to start off with the bad stuff, because obviously, in life, there would be no good if there wasn't bad. They have to balance each other out. So the bad that I went through, this happened just days before Christmas, a little over 10 years ago in 2011. I was in my bed sleeping. I was on the 7th floor loft in downtown Phoenix. 3 men came into my home that night. I was stripped naked. I was held down. I was raped. I was beaten. And one of those 3 men had been my partner of almost a decade. They were all drunk. I'll never understand it. It doesn't matter how many therapists you put in front of me, I sit down and tell, it'll never completely be something I'll understand. To have somebody that I love that much that could have been part of something so horrific that could have almost killed me that night. They came moments away from killing me before all the police arrived. And then the second wave of what happened to me is the police dismissed it categorically. later on, they apologized. They said they treated me differently because I'm a gay man. And they didn't arrest any of the guys, even though they knew everything that happened. So I tell that because there were two waves of my PTSD like 2 waves of trauma that hit me. And I know a lot of nurses out there are probably going to relate, because it's not always just one thing that happens. It could be multiple things that are happening. And in my case, it was 2 waves of that trauma. What the men did to me and how the police responded or didn't respond, that was traumatic. So a couple years went by that I just wasn't processing it completely, what happened to me. And there was just a day that I was reading, it was in like this May of 2014. I was reading Time magazine, and the cover story was about rape. And I remember I put the magazine down. I put my lunch down. I called my friend Jeremy, and I said, I think this actually happened to me, rape. And he said, I know it did. He said, I just didn't know how. He said, I knew it was going to take you time, and I couldn't force you to process it and understand it. But it's sort of weird to think, like, how did I not know this happened to me? I did know it, but after that night, I just began shutting it down. It was within me, and it's your brain's way actually to protect you, but it's only meant to be temporary, where your brain, until you're better able to process the trauma you've been through, it's there and it's fragmented. And also part of the big problem when and then it was a couple months later, the doctors diagnosed me with PTSD. But the people that had worked with me, the therapists, they said to me, it's probably not going to make sense, but you had 7 men there that night, 4 police officers, 3 men that were involved in this rape. And all of them said it didn't happen, but I knew it happened. So they said what it is, it's called dissociative amnesia. And in that case, I took ownership. They said, because if you know in your brain this happened, but the other 7 said it did not, somebody's got to take ownership. And by default, I did. And that, and I think nurses, you're going to probably have moments that you can look back and think, if nobody's putting blame, sometimes they're saying now that there aren't enough nurses, there's a burnout happening, there are nurses leaving. And I think a lot of times, from what I heard from the nurses when I was hospitalized recently, is they said, they almost carry that default where they feel like they're doing something wrong. What are we doing wrong that we're carrying the load for everybody, but we're getting criticized because we're not working quickly enough? Well, you're working quickly enough. It's just you have more patience, is what these nurses told me recently. And the pressure and the stress is even greater. So in those ways, I feel like the nurses in the hospital were saying our story is sort of similar, because we are taking the brunt of the abuse now because of the shortage and the burnout, and we're taking responsibility for something that's really not our fault. Right. So in that sense, I think when you're going through trauma, it doesn't matter that I was raped, or it doesn't matter that nurses are going through this struggle with the burnout. It's still trauma. And at the end of the day, I think all of our stories are the same in that sense, because they're trauma related.
Yeah. We've heard, I was just going to say, Ron, we've heard a lot from nurses, particularly over the past couple of years, where, here we are in the middle of this terrible pandemic. A number of people have left the industry, and, with the overload of cases, due to COVID, hospitals just become incredibly busy places. So they're there trying to help, and yet patients are getting more demanding. Patients' families are getting more demanding. Hospital staff is getting more demanding, and they feel like, I'm here to help, but I'm getting squeezed from both sides here. And it's an incredible amount of pressure that they're facing.
Right. And I know the nurses try to help me as best they can. They gave me those non-slip socks. They told me to press the buzzer, especially when I was in ICU. They said, you have to press this button. You can't get up on your own because you are in the ICU. We get that you're a lot different than most of the people here, but I was doing the best I could. I felt like I'm supposed to help these nurses, and here I am in ICU, but that's, and it's not that the nurses told me that they don't have time for me. I could sense that they were overwhelmed. So I would try and get up and do things, and they said, you can't. You got to leave that to us. And they felt badly because because I felt like I was a burden to them. And isn't that the shame that we're at a point now where in some cases the patients feel a burden? They feel like they're the burden to these nurses because the nurses are overwhelmed. And so I in some cases, I don't want people to walk away from this and think we're in a really bad spot. What do we do? One of the suggestions I had to some of the nurses that were working with me, I said, you know what? Have you guys ever thought about writing some op-ed pieces to the papers? Maybe doing a TEDx talk. There are ways, instead of, like, for me, on the journey that I've had to get better, I did do a TEDx talk. I didn't know what those things were. I didn't even know what a TEDx talk was 6 years ago. But when I started on this journey to get better, I found out a lot. I reached out to reporters and said, hey, is there a way I can share my story, maybe more in a positive way? And that was the choice I had, is that instead of, making it like a fire and brimstone speech, I was doing it maybe more in a lighthearted manner. Not that you can make fun or joke about the situation we're in, but I was also trying to show the bright spots, like what's helping me get through PTSD. And for me, it was talking about it, meeting people, opening up about the struggles that I had. And like, even being in the hospital recently, I'm sure there's an op-ed piece coming out in me somewhere where I can talk about these really cool moments that happen in the midst of all this trauma that I'm going through in the hospital. And I did find some great moments. And for years, I've written hundreds of short stories for a lot of small publications and a couple of big ones. But what I do is I find these moments, these real life moments, and I write about them. And I just thought, I think nurses, my suggestion is, a lot of you see those moments that you can seize upon, whether it's calling up a reporter and saying, hey, I want to talk about something, to see if we can make things better by opening up a discussion with your audience, or writing that op-ed, or doing a TEDx talk, or contacting the local college and saying, hey, can some of your students do a 15-minute documentary about what we're going through? And that was another thing that happened with me. There were a group of students at Arizona State University. They heard about my story of, successfully moving beyond PTSD, and they did a documentary. So now it's really cool that it's not just me telling people that there need to be changes. They can see it through art, or they can see it through a documentary or a TEDx talk. So I keep saying that, but find ways that you can have a good outlet. And it's not just you and your colleagues that, because when you're sitting there with the charge nurse and you guys are upset about something, it just stays within the confines of those walls. But if you do something outside and you reach a lot more people, people will hear you. And to the nurses at Banner University Hospital in downtown Phoenix, people are getting to hear you now, because now I'm speaking up and I'm bringing some of your concerns forth. So they did speak up to me. And I think that's beautiful, because now I'm, as I promised them, I would speak out for them, and I'm doing that. So I feel happy now.
Well, Rana, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, and we're getting some great comments here that I want to speak to in a moment, but I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about specifically what were some of the symptoms of your PTSD. So after your rape, what happened in terms of your mental state of health, physically what was happening, your relationships? Can you talk a bit about what you experienced after that? Because I think our audience would be very interested in hearing kind of, what are some of these symptoms? How do I know what's happening?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll tell you my symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
There were 3 major symptoms I experienced. And one was just anger. It was uncharacteristic. I know I'm a quarter Irish, and some of my Irish friends are telling me, they said, that's just the Irish anger in me. No, it was more than that. And when you're in the middle of it, it's you don't know it. But when I look back, yeah, anger was one of them. The other was isolation. I used to be a city councilman in suburban Chicago for years. And then I moved to Arizona. And then after this trauma, I became just this guy that I just couldn't understand. How could this gregarious guy that I was all of a sudden just not want to go? And I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to be around people. And people would criticize me for that, the anger, the isolation. The other one was trust. Still to this day, it is hard for me to trust people. And if there's one thing, all the doctors, all the physician's assistants, the ER techs, the nurse, everybody in the hospital, I kept saying over and over, I have PTSD. I struggle with trust issues. I said, if you can just understand where I'm coming from, it will help tremendously. Because they would ask me too, are there any illnesses, prior situations that we should be aware of so we can treat you? Yeah, PTSD. And trust was the biggest, because I said, if you're coming into my room and you're going to stick a big needle in me, like, what is that needle for? How badly is this going to hurt? How long is this needle going to be in me? So those were things that I had to deal with. But those were the three big ones for me.
And did you have, you alluded to it, but did you have close friends and family coming up to you and saying, Ron, something has changed, you're different? And you were saying, I feel like I'm the same person. I don't know what you're talking about. Describe those interactions. I'm curious.
Yeah. And Steve, if you don't mind, like, I want to actually make, I'm going to share a movie that when people have asked me before, is there,
Okay.
what would you do to describe PTSD? It's the movie The Sixth Sense. And it has, Bruce Willis is in it. And he's come into a lot of news stories lately because he has, I think it's called aphasia.
Yes.
So anyway, he's been in the news a lot. And I thought this could be appropriate to bring it up. But in the movie The Sixth Sense, and it's, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. I'm going to spoil it for you, but it's almost a quarter. It's been out 23 years, you guys.
I saw it.
Well, if I ruin it for you, still go see it. It's a good movie. I'm just going to ruin the ending, but I think most people have seen it. But in that movie, Bruce Willis is a child psychologist. He's helping this kid, Haley Joel Osment. He's like an 8-year-old kid. But there's this point where the kid says to Bruce Willis, they only see what they want to see. And he's describing this certain group of people. He says they don't know they're dead. And then at the end of the movie, we as the viewers and Bruce Willis's character realizes Bruce Willis is dead through the whole movie. Yeah. And it's chilling. Like, even I'm getting goosebumps now because it's just this chilling movie. But that kid says, you see, these people see what they want to see and they don't know they're dead. To me, that's the best way to describe PTSD. I didn't realize I had PTSD. I'm walking around like this zombie in a way. And people around me are seeing these changes in me, like Haley Joel Osment. And it's chilling for me because when I watched that movie one day, I think it was in the last year, I just stopped it and thought, you got to be kidding me. Like, this is a metaphor for what I went through. And I think a lot of people with PTSD are like that. You are walking around, the people around you are like, why don't you see this? And it's, in some ways, we're choosing not to see that because, and that's one of the symptoms of PTSD, avoidance. You're avoiding talking about the bad stuff. And as travel nurses, there are issues that, as the nurses told me in the hospital recently, that you just keep going. You don't want to talk about these bad things. Your goal is the next duty, wherever you're going next. Is it Portland, Maine? Is it going to be Portland, Oregon? Right. And you're focused on that. But the thing is, people around you can see this. and when you go to a new hospital, maybe those colleagues there, they saw something in you, but now you're in a new hospital. Right. And so now by the time they figure out, quote unquote, you're dead or you're diagnosed with PTSD, off you go again. And so I think that's really a good way to describe it. Watch that movie and you guys will see what I'm talking about. Even if you've seen it before, I think it's a really great way to describe it.
Did you have, and I know, people mean well, right? When somebody is suffering with something, I think, sometimes people in their own way try to help, but it's not always the best advice. Did you have people that said, Ron, or, close friends and family say, Ron, you just have to move on, shake it off, just kind of not being callous, but their lack of understanding was just, pushing you in a direction that just really wasn't the way to deal with it. I'm curious to see how people were advising you.
Yeah. I mean, well, I grew up in the south side of Chicago, in that area where the steel mills are, very blue collar. I'll always be a blue collar guy. It doesn't matter if I have a PhD, I'm still going to be a blue collar PhD. Right. But where I grew up, and it's just that there's this tough side of me, and my buddies, sort of like nurses, you got to have this tough exterior to keep doing the job every day. So whether you're a blue collar guy, a nurse, you have the same traits as I do. And so when some of my buddies, they meant well, and it's just who we are, how we grew up. And they're like, hey man, you can be tough. You can stick this out. But, like my brother who had stage 4 cancer a year or two ago, nobody told him like, hey dude, you can tough this out. Yeah, he could tough it out as long as he had chemotherapy and radiation, which he did. So when you have symptoms of PTSD, how is that any different than stage 4 cancer that my brother had, the lymphoma? You got to get help, whether that's just acknowledging that you got the PTSD. So as nurses, you've got to listen to those people. You got to sit down. If it means taking some time away for 2 months and not traveling anywhere, do that, because that 2 months of you taking a break or 4 months could save your life.
What are some of the unhealthy ways, Ron, that through your experience and your role as director of the American PTSD Association, you've experienced? What are some unhealthy ways that people deal with PTSD? I'm assuming drinking, drugs. What are some other ways that people try and mask the pain or deal with it?
Just avoidance. I mean, sometimes you avoid any discussions about. Some of the nurses told me in the hospital, they watched so many people die from COVID the last 2 years. They told me they just shut down. They don't really talk about it anymore. Oh, and Steve, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I wrote this down. This is one of the things some of the nurses told me to discuss. I actually, while I was in the hospital, I was trying to sleep. And anybody that's been in a hospital knows that ain't an easy task.
No.
First of all, you're in pain, but when the pain can subside, maybe from some medications, I said to these nurses, how in the heck do you do your job? I go, don't you hear all these buzzing and these beeps and these alarms? And a couple of them laughed and they looked at me and said, it's called alarm fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah.
They said, what happens is you just ignore it.
Yeah.
And they said, that's so dangerous, because what happens is you become jaded. But they said, but I was like, it was driving me bananas, and I was only in there 5 days. And after a while, I started getting used to it, but it ain't easy.
Yeah, they also call it. There's a component that's used a lot called compassion fatigue, and to the extent that with such emotion and such tragedy. I mean, again, nursing is not an easy job, but particularly the past couple of years, it's been really tough. But some of the nurses are describing in our discussion groups on the Gypsy nurse is just this compassion fatigue. It's just they're spent, literally. Physically, emotionally, just spent. They just can't give anymore, and it's just compassion fatigue.
And and from what I could see, when you asked, like, what are some other, obviously, if people, how they deal with PTSD in a bad way, they might drink or do drugs. They could get very abusive in their life to other people. But one of the ways too is just that shutting down, whether it's compassion fatigue or alarm fatigue. It means you're shutting out parts of the world. And that's dangerous, because now you're living in this, like, it's called suspension of disbelief. I was watching something the other day and they talked about it but suspension of disbelief is because there's this fantasy world that you allow this fantasy world to exist, but it's usually for entertainment purposes. But if you're using that suspension of disbelief, it's got to be done in the right way. I mean, you can't do it to block out bad stuff. You have to deal with that bad stuff in your real life. And I've done that too, where I just didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to deal with it. It's incredibly dangerous. And then you're always on high alert. If you've gone through a trauma, not everybody, but there are times that I'll look at, I have to stop sometimes, because even when I go out to a restaurant, I'm looking around because I'm trying to see if one of those 3 perpetrators or their friends are in there, because I stay close to where they're at. So, maybe for a nurse, if something triggers you and you see somebody that has a bandage on your head, or you see somebody, maybe they're wearing a shirt that brings something alive to you. Maybe, I don't know, if they're wearing a Boston Red Sox shirt and maybe a patient was brought into the ER and they were wearing a Boston Red Sox shirt that had blood all over it. That could be a trigger for you at a restaurant, just seeing that shirt. So, and
then you're in that fight or flight mode all the time, which is very, very physically demanding. Ron, I want to take a moment here. We've got, again, very grateful for people joining us today. And I want to, run through some of the comments, and then we have some questions here. People are very, very appreciative of your sharing your story and sharing your time. We've got a number of people saying thank you. Jamie says, I love this. Thank you very much. Christina's talking about, PTSD and just, things building up, which I think you had talked about earlier. Nurses carry the load of everything, and things just build up and build up and build up. We have Lucy saying, so grateful that you're sharing and speaking with us, Mr. Blake. Thank you very much. Courtney says, thank you. Elena says, thank you for sharing your story. Lori says, you're so strong for sharing your story. Thank you. And so forth. So a lot of appreciation here, Ron, a lot of gratitude for your sharing. Others are talking about, as you mentioned, the alarm fatigue and compassion fatigue. Yes, it's real. Absolutely. And it's dangerous. Christina mentions it's very dangerous. And yeah, I'm sure it's physically and mentally taxing and can probably impact the nursing job if things get a little out of control. Gina says, I will have PTSD if I'm watching multiple people die from COVID, which many nurses have over and over again, that frustration, that of not being able to help, that tragedy, and so forth. Now, Christina does have a specific question, if I may, and that is, what do you think would be the best way to go about obtaining a PTSD diagnosis? So if somebody feels what you're talking about, Ron, is resonating, and they feel that they need to do something, need to go to somebody, what is the best way to confirm, in fact, that it is PTSD and then move forward in some sort of treatment or treatment plan?
Well, and this just happened to me yesterday. I came across this, it's a diagnostic tool. And I took it because there's a trauma specialist after the car crash that I was in the other day. Well, yeah, I don't know if I shared this earlier, I forgot. But after I got released from the hospital, I was in a car crash. If you can, I don't know why. It's sometimes the universe or life has a weird way of working, but it was a hit and run. I was injured. In addition to all the injuries I just sustained from the blood clotting. So now I've been assigned a team of attorneys is helping me with the claim. And one of the things is they want to make sure my health is taken care of. Sure. So they've assigned me I'm really happy and grateful for this. They assigned a trauma specialist. She's going to be working with me tomorrow in a whole new group of sessions because this accident triggered a lot inside me. I hadn't been speaking yet completely about what happened in the hospital to me. So to answer that question, what's out there that could start helping you, maybe diagnose you? First and foremost, I mean, as healthcare professionals, you guys probably know, you'd have to check with your doctor. I think that would be the best thing to say, hey, I might have a situation here. Can you guide me? What are the next steps? But what they did to me yesterday, this new trauma specialist, she sent me what's called a PCL, P as in Paul, C as in cat, L as in Larry, 5. And I didn't know this, but it's 20 questions. It's I guess pretty predominantly used. And why nobody told me about this? Maybe they had questioned me and they never put it in front of me, but just asked me the questions. This time they sent it to me online. I filled it out. I didn't do too well. Thus, I'm getting help. But when I did, so for the person that asked about that, it is PCL 5. And you can pull it up online and go through those 20 questions. But again, I would say, don't just do that alone, because when you start diagnosing yourself, you need a professional in there working with you, but at least that's something that could diagnostically, you can get a gauge as to where you're at. And I got a pretty good gauge yesterday when I filled it out, and I'm glad I'm getting help because I didn't do too well on the exam, meaning I scored very high in the sense that I need some help.
Ron, what are the, what would your advice be, or what is your perspective on, people that just look at time alone as a treatment, right? I mean, the old adage, well, time heals all wounds. PTSD is a pretty deep wound. Mm-hmm. If people say, well, I'm just going to wait a few months and see how it goes, what is your advice to them? Because I would imagine a lot of people probably feel that way. Eventually this will go away. I'll feel better. What's your perspective on that?
I'll just tie it into what happened to me 2 weeks ago on St. Patrick's Day. Steve, I wasn't going to go to the hospital. I thought, you know what? I wanted to go, and I looked at my leg, my lower leg swelled excessively. And I just thought maybe what you just said, maybe another day or two. I'll ice it. I think I'll stay off of it tomorrow. I'll take more ibuprofen. And the doctors said, and the nurses, everybody said, they actually think if I'd have waited another day or two, I might not be alive. And I would say the same thing with PTSD. Or if you're not diagnosed with PTSD and just say, I'm struggling badly, I am having mental health care issues right now. You know, it sounds like I'm not trying to be this dramatic guy that's exaggerating everything, but if you're struggling really badly and you've been struggling, let's say for a while with mental health care issues, you know, you may say another day, another week, another month, but you know, I'll share this with you. I didn't share this yet with you guys. I woke up from another nightmare on November 2nd of 2015, and I was going to take my life. I got all my pills out. I kept saying, hey, things are going to get better for me. And I thought they were. I just kept having these nightmares. And when I woke up that night, I was going to take my life, not because I wanted to die, because I wanted the pain to stop. It got to a point where a pain was unbearable. And the only thing, and I need to, maybe I'll share this happy moment with you guys, because I don't want you to think I'm doom and gloom. That moment, as I was getting ready to take those pills that night, my television was on, and I have no idea why. It's the only time ever on that television set that when I'd set the timer, because every night I'd set the timer, it didn't go off. And there was a comedy show on. It's called The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Something at that exact moment on that show made me laugh. And I paused the show. It was that moment of laughter that changed my life. It saved my life because I realized there was still something left in me. And I have no idea. I'm Catholic. I don't know if it was God that came into my life that moment, if it was the universe. Doesn't really matter. You know, it stopped me. And that was the happiest moment because I realized at that moment there was something left. And it began this journey where this is my journey. Not everybody's going to do what I did, but I went out I'm still doing it for thousands of days in a row now. I've gone out trying to get on this show as a guest. But what I've done is I've gone up to strangers every day. I speak to them. I tell them my story. I've learned not to isolate anymore. I learned to talk about what happened to me and address it. And it's been helping me with my anger issues because people are sharing back with me. I'm connecting with human beings. And we've created thousands of square feet of artwork on these boards I carry. So it opened up something inside me, but that became my therapy. And I wanted to share that just because I don't want people to see all the bad. There are so many amazing, and that's how I was able to do the TEDx talk, the documentary. Even Pope Francis sent me a letter. So I want to tell you guys, things do get better, but you have to take that step at wanting to get the help, and it will happen.
Well, and I do, we have about 15 minutes remaining, Ron, and I that is one of the things I want to lead to is, while this is a valley, PTSD is certainly probably the deepest of valleys. There is hope, there is a path forward, and I'd like you to talk about that in a moment. But, you know, as I look at, and I'm not a healthcare professional myself, but, you know, having been with the Gypsy Nurse now for several years and being connected with the community, an observation that I have that I'm hoping comes true is that perhaps with everything that's gone on over the past couple of years with COVID and its impact on healthcare and the healthcare community, there has been an aspect of bringing mental health and mental health awareness to the forefront, because I think that the healthcare community has been underserved in terms of recognizing mental health awareness, mental health issues. And, you know, by us doing, you know, a talk with you on this topic and just seeing what's out there, we're hearing more and more about hospital facilities, you know, offering mental health support for nurses and other staff members, staffing agencies that specialize in travel nurses or other healthcare professionals offering mental health services to their travelers. So starting to see this awareness come to the forefront within the healthcare community, because really, if nurses and healthcare professionals are taking care of us, but who's taking care of them? I think it's time to turn the attention to them and their health, both physical and mental. So in terms of hope, that's one of the things I hope is that this will, if there's anything good that can come out of this awful pandemic, perhaps one thing would be this mental health awareness within the healthcare community. But I would like to talk to you a little bit about the path forward for people that are suspect that they may have symptoms and so forth, and suspect they may be suffering for this. You've kind of outlined a path of seeking assistance. But what is the journey like to move forward? I know it doesn't necessarily end; it's kind of an ongoing thing. But what is the journey like? Tell me about, as you went through steps, how you started to, feel better and start to be you again. I'd like to hear a little bit about that and give people some hope.
Yeah. And I maybe a good way to start with this is a woman in South Georgia reached out to me the other day. She found me on the American PTSD, their website. And she reached out and she said, I know you're in Phoenix, but can you help me? She says, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I'm struggling to find a specialist in the rural area here. And she said, can you help me? So what I did is I contacted a bunch of organizations in Georgia and said, can you guys help me help this woman? And I think at the point she contacted me, some people said to me, well, why couldn't she have done this on her own? Well, she did. She reached out to me and they said, I know, but why couldn't she have done what you did and contacted? The thing is, when you're struggling really badly, you need somebody to say, I'm struggling really badly. And to do what might seem to other people as the obvious, just call these agencies. She's struggling. And so you don't always see clearly, but she thought clearly enough to reach out to help to me. And I helped her. So it's just like the nurses, like people are going to reach out to you to do what may seem obvious, but we need your help as nurses. So we come to you with those things that are so obvious. So to take the first step is like what this woman did in South Georgia the other day. She reached out and said, I'm sort of messed up right now. I need you to help me, guide me. And she was so tickled pink that I sent her all these resources in Georgia. And I said, one of these, keep calling these, because one of those will lead to something good. Even if the others don't, keep trying. And I shared my experience. I said, listen, I've tried psychiatrists. I've tried a lot of people. My journey, what I do when I meet all these strangers, my social interaction therapy, that's what's helping me the most, but it doesn't mean that's what's going to help her. So don't give up. And we're always going to do all the wrong things in life. Like, I think sometimes people are like, am I really a good parent? Am I really a good accountant? Am I really a good nurse? None of us are good. We have to keep trying every day to be good. None of us are a good parent. The way you become a good parent, a good nurse, a good accountant is you keep doing it. You keep making mistakes. So when you're trying to get help for what you're going through, I experienced a psychiatrist that he was horrible. He was so unprofessional. I did a video and I put it on Instagram. I didn't use his name, but I thought it was important that people needed to hear that story, because you're going to run into people in the professional fields that aren't so professional. And they could be doctors. They could have all the titles and letters behind their name. It doesn't mean they're always good at what they do. So keep trying. Don't give up. Yeah. It will happen. Like, look at me now. I had this horrible hospitalization and all the things I went through with blood clots. I'm going to be dealing with that for a while. And now I got a car crash. But I didn't give up, and now more specialists are going to help me. So that's what I would say is take that first step, reach out to somebody and say, maybe I'm so bad right now and it's such a bad situation. Can you help guide me? And people are out there. They will help guide you. And one more thing, Steve, I just wanted to share. If one of your buddies comes to you and says, hey, or a colleague says, hey, man, I need some help. I've been feeling suicidal. For the love of God, if they come to you and say something, don't hand them a hotline and say, call this. For the love of God, you're standing in front of them. Do something yourself at that moment. And you know what? Even if you don't know what to say something. Say anything. Just say, hey, I don't know the exact words to say to you right now, but I'm here for you. And I may screw up and say some of the wrong things, but know that my intent is to be your pal and to make sure that you're not going to go through this alone. But don't hand somebody a hotline and walk away, because that to them, it's like you're important, but not important enough to hear what you got to say. You call a hotline. And I say that because I've heard a lot of people that have struggled that they said people hand them that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
help them.
and you know, you bring up such an important point, Ron, because I know there's people probably watching now that, you know, perhaps they aren't experiencing it themselves, but they may know friends or colleagues or whatever that may be um, showing some symptoms or showing some signs that are, you know, making them concerned. What would be, you know, as an observer to somebody, what would be some of the things that you would say to watch out for? I mean, there's the obvious where I'm thinking of hurting myself, but what are some of the other things in which, as a friend or a colleague, you would suggest that somebody get involved and then help that person? What are some warning signs?
Sleep. I mean, if normally you were getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep, and then all of a sudden for the next month, you're struggling to get 3 or 4 hours of sleep,
Yeah.
there's a problem. The other side can be, I've met a lot of people that instead of sleeping 7 hours a night, they're in bed for 12 hours and
Okay.
they don't want to get up. That's oftentimes depression. I can't diagnose everybody.
Right.
I shouldn't diagnose anybody, but those are signs. There was a time I struggled to even eat anything. I mean, I love food. I mean, I'm a skinny guy because I run a lot, but I love to eat. There were days that I would have to force myself to eat cereal. And so I knew that I should have known there was a much bigger problem. So your eating patterns, your sleeping patterns are disrupted.
So if I'm a colleague or a friend and I'm observing somebody that I'm concerned about and I'm seeing that there is rapid weight loss, they're
Right.
sleeping all the time, they're not eating, those sorts of things, that's a red flag.
Yeah. And worse comes to worse. Cause I know people, they tend to tune out if you read a whole list of like warning signs. So what I tell people is use
Right.
common sense. If
Yeah.
this has been your pal, let's say this is your nursing colleague for the last 3 years in the ER, and all of a sudden your friend is different. And they're like, how am I different? Explain to them how they're different, because you will see those warning signs. Just the other thing, if I have to say this phrase again, for the love of God, just use common sense. And I say that to myself when I look in the mirror every day. I'm like, I have to use common sense. But if you see drastic changes, that's your pal. You've known her in the ER for 3 years or known him. You're going to know when things are different and bring it up. And you just say, listen, man, as your buddy, I've been noticing some stuff is off. Are you okay? And sometimes they're going to push back and say, yep, I'm okay. And they ain't okay. But don't give up on them. Stay the course, because sometimes it takes, keep inviting them. Say, hey, we're going out tonight. We're just going to get a quick bite to eat. But don't give up on that person, because that's another thing. I've heard people say that my friends finally gave up on me. And it's tough. You can't force them, but don't exclude them from your life. Just keep talking to them. Keep trying. Keep being around. Drop off, something at their desk. Keep inviting them, but don't give up on them.
Yeah.
Don't.
Ron, in terms of your healing and moving forward and, the role that different things play in that, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, basically the physicality of it. So kind of mind and body. You mentioned that you're a runner. Maybe you could talk a bit about how exercise and physical fitness and diet and those sorts of things have played a role in your recovery.
Yeah, and there are two big things that probably every single one of the nurses in the hospital that helped me recently, they all got to hear me say this, but it was important for me to share with them, because I said, well, they were asking, they said, when you leave here, do you have some supports? And I said, I do. But I told them the two best things that have helped me get through the PTSD over these last however many years, 5, 6, 7 years, has been my running, my exercising, but mostly running. And the other one is my writing. I've written hundreds of short stories, and I get a lot out of me when I do those two things. So what do you think happened when I was hospitalized recently? And I've been struggling since post hospitalization. The doctors, they all looked at me, every specialist, and said, if we find that you're trying to run, we are going to come after you. They want me, but it's hard not to do those things that help you so much. So I cannot run. So what I'm doing now is I'm having to make up the bulk of everything by writing a lot. And it's helping me. So that writing is taking over the running for the time being. So, as traveling nurses, as nurses, you're going to have to find out what helps you cope the best. I can't how about this? Just not as a traveling nurse, it's just as a human being.
Yeah.
Find out what helps you cope, and grab onto that, adhere to that. If it's laughter, great. Do laughter. If it's what I told you, like what works for me, great. There's something out there, and hold on to those things, because those, like, can you imagine? Laughter is what saved my life on November 2nd, 2015. If it would not have been for that, I wouldn't be here today. So find those things and let it guide you to a better place.
You mentioned your writing and how voluminous it is and how important it is to you. Um, in reading different articles about mental health and anxiety and those sort of things. And I don't know, maybe that's a bad comparison, but they talk about the importance of journaling, and it seems so antiquated in many ways, because you kind of get this image of paper and pencil and a notebook, but many mental health professionals are saying that's exactly what to do. That the impact of journaling and getting your thoughts down on paper are very important, and B, the actual physical act of writing can be very therapeutic. So it kind of reminds me of that when you're mentioning that, the importance of journaling. But I also wanted to ask you too, and this is a very personal subject for people. We don't have to get into specifics, but what role does faith play, or at least in your particular instance, how did your faith play into this? If at all, did that help you in your recovery? And again, I don't mean to pry. I don't want to get into too many specifics here, but I'm just curious as to what your experience was with your faith and how this has helped you.
It has helped me. I identify as Catholic, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I feel I'm a devout Catholic. And I mean, that definition's up to me. I have some people that said, do you go to church every week? Nope. I hardly ever go to church. I might go to church 4 or 5 times a year, but it doesn't matter, because when I go, it makes me happy. And I tell people the faith is a big part of what I go through. And you know what? Sometimes I've told my mother this. I said, honestly, sometimes it makes me super happy to identify as Catholic, because it makes my family happy. My mother, my father, my family. And people have told me before, critics said, well, that's not a good enough reason to say that you're Catholic. Well, it's good enough for me. And it makes me happy. And, just because I don't go to church, maybe I go every couple months, but it makes me feel good. And I think that's what we have to start learning in society. And I feel like what I've been through, I've been that close to death that night. And I just think, maybe I'm like Harry Potter, and I think her name was Luna something in the Harry Potter, where they get off the train. And for the first time, Harry, when he gets on this train, he says, oh my gosh, there are horses leading the carts to the castle. All the other times he never saw these horses. It was just, they thought magic. And Luna says, oh, you can see them now. And he says, why? And she says, because you've been that close to death. And I feel like in some ways, maybe my faith, like I've been that close, I just feel okay. Like if I die today, I don't know, maybe right before I die, I'm going to cry like a little kid, but I feel like I'm okay right now. And I don't want to die, but I feel maybe what I've been through has prepared me to say, I'm okay with whatever happens. I mean, I do want to live, but my faith has just said, it's mine. It's whatever I want it to be. And that makes me feel so good. So yes, the faith has played a big part. And there was even a priest at the Basilica de Santa Maria in downtown Phoenix. Like, he helped me because I talked to him about the issues I was struggling with, and he was a source of comfort for me. So yes, my faith has been there. It's always there. It's not going to go away.
And for people that have faith, perhaps that is, as you said, one of the tools that will help them in their recovery and their journey. Ron, we only have a few minutes left here, and again, we're getting some wonderful comments and very appreciative comments. I want to run through them a little bit. Then there's a couple of questions, and I want to wrap up with making sure that people know more about the American PTSD Association, how they can find resources on the site, and so forth. So a few things here. People were asking about the form, and I believe that Rachel had given them the PCL5 form, I believe it was. So
Yes.
she gave them information on that. We have Denise, who says, thank you so much for sharing, Ron. Such a great example of how mental health is critically important. There is still a terrible stigma. And I think you had touched on that. I think that many people are afraid to seek assistance because of the stigma that can be associated with it. And I think we're here to dispel that thought process. It's Her World Now says great information. Sandra says thank you so much. Christina does have a question, Brett, you might be able to help here. She says, I'm having a very hard time finding a therapist. I get so discouraged. Any advice there? You mentioned a person that you saw for assistance and they were not helpful at all. So I was just curious to see if you want to put in a moment on that.
Yeah, and there's an organization called NAMI, N as in Nancy, A as in Apple, M as in Mary, I as in Igloo. My understanding is each state has a NAMI organization, and they can help lead you to other organizations, resources in your state that could help you maybe find a specialist or find help.
I'm sorry, Ron, it's NAMI?
Yes, NAMI.
I'm just going to put that in the chat there.
And that could be a good resource to start with.
Sure.
Yeah. And then there should be a Mental Health of America. Those are usually in every state too. So I would think those two would be really good, at least to get started. And if they don't always have answers, they can start sending you to other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And we just put that in the chat. We have Rachel had put this in here on behalf of the Gypsy nurse, but we do have a contributor to the Gypsy nurse. Her name is Krista Berg, and she is just a wonderful lady. And unfortunately, she lost her husband to suicide a few years ago, and she has done some virtual sessions with us and some articles with us on mental health and so forth. And, you were talking about providing assistance to people and support. Rachel mentions her quote, which is, you, my dear, matter, which is kind of her thought process around people that are looking at, harming themselves and people providing support to them and letting them know you matter, I care, and you matter to me. And I think that's an important message that I'm sure you would agree with.
Yes.
Larissa says, such a great conversation. There are nurses out there who feel the effects of PTSD, but are less able to share it. So I think conversations like this are incredibly helpful with letting people know that they can seek help. It's okay. It's important to do so. Hiroko says, thank you very much for sharing your stories. Hearing this from someone is very powerful. I wish many people were more aware of these issues. Courtney says, exercise helped me so much with the struggles I had while working in COVID. So talk about, getting out there and moving, right, and getting some form of physical exercise and so forth. Right. That's very helpful. Lori says, I love your perspective. And a couple of people, evidently they are familiar with NAMI, and they say it's a fantastic organization. And Christina says, thank you. So just some great comments and some questions here. And again, everybody universally appreciative of your story, Ron, what you're sharing with us, and appreciative of your time. I'm wondering if in closing, if you want to just mention, one more time about the American PTSD Association, the resources that are involved, and how people could reach out, or even reach out to you through the organization if they so choose, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I shared with you guys before we went on, there's this story a magazine in Phoenix did. They shared my story, and if you did a Google search and did Trendsetters, Ron Blake, it should pop up, because what that feature story did, it showed me as a human being. It actually has tie-ins to like the Instagram site that I have. I think the TEDx talk. So it has tie-ins so that there's takeaways for people. But I think it's so powerful because I want you guys to be able to see that I have had successes and accomplishments. I don't want nurses to walk away from this feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to go through hell. I mean, you may have to go through a little hell to get to the good stuff. But the beauty is, if you start taking that first step and you realize there's a problem, that's beautiful, because then you're going to join a lot of people out there that we've gotten help. So yeah, that Trendsetters story, if you just put my name in and Trendsetters Phoenix, I think it's really positive. It's really cool. And it does tie in some other stuff. And I think that there would be amazing takeaways for you guys. So I'd like to recommend that one. I think that might make people happy and hopeful.
Okay. And Rachel just put that out in the chat there, the link to that, which is fantastic. I would also recommend too, Ron, that, when we first met back a few months ago, I found you through LinkedIn, and I did have a chance to see some of your, if you Google your name and TEDx talks, you did a couple of fantastic TEDx talks, and I would highly recommend that people watch those as well. Those were great.
And I think that's it. Just when we share our stories, they're takeaways for people, because then that might open up. I hope some nurses think about doing a TEDx talk, and it doesn't always have to be bad. It could be, let's leave it at that. I hope some of you guys, after you heard this conversation today, I hope you consider doing a TEDx talk, because I think a lot of you have a lot to say, and there are a lot of people out there that we want to listen. And I listened to a lot of nurses. There had to be 24 nurses I listened to over the last 2 weeks. And I think they're really proud of me because I shared some of their stories through me. So please, please, please consider doing op-ed pieces, you guys, or TEDx talks, or whatever it is. Get out there. You guys can make a heck of a difference by speaking out.
Ron Blake, a director at the American PTSD Association, we thank you so much for your time today. This has been really one of the most important things I think that we can bring to our community is this discussion, and I can't think of anybody better to connect with than with you. I'm grateful that we connected back a few months ago. I'm grateful for your time, and I know that this discussion not only has helped a lot of people through this session, but also too, we will make this available online on our site, so people can go back and reference for this, and would love to continue to work with you, Ron, in any way that you're available, whether it's doing more of these sessions, contributing content to our website. I just think you're an inspiration, and I think you're just an incredibly helpful person to bring your experience to our nursing community. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for doing what you do. I'm glad you've had a heck of a couple of weeks. I mean, if you show your T-shirt, you had mentioned the I'm Lucky T-shirt.
I said I chose this today because I really am lucky to be here today. I didn't realize, the nurses and doctors told me, I guess I didn't realize how bad my situation was. So thanks to a lot of doctors and nurses.
Amen.
I'm lucky to be here. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, nurses. I appreciate you guys listening.
Ron, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We will hopefully talk to you soon. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, you guys. Take care.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that concludes our second session of the day. We have one more. What a great, great session that was. And any of you that may think that you have it, or you might not, take that quiz, reach out to a therapist, reach out to somebody, even Ron, his information scrolling at the bottom. It's so important. You've been through so much, through your whole nursing career. I'm sure you've all probably seen something that's really, messed with you or anything like that. So don't take it lightly. Go, get the help that you need. So.
Absolutely. Ron is just a very inspirational person, and I'm so appreciative of the information he's passed along to our community. He really is a truly wonderful person. So this is really why we do these virtual conferences and why we do these sessions, to help the community. And I can't think of anybody better to have on than Ron. So
definitely. And if you want to share this or watch it again, if you want to, get some resources, just sign up as a registered member on the gypsynurse.com. If you're not already, it's going to be on demand. So you can share this with your friends, or, go back and look at it. It's going to always be there on the gypsynurse.com. So you have that resource. But that is all we have for this session. We have a dating panel tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Myself and another Gypsy Nurse employee, Shannon Nelson.
I will not be a great contributor for that one. My experience goes back to the 80s, and nobody wants to hear that.
We're heading back towards the 80s, so
maybe we are.
Maybe we need some 80s love back.
Maybe we do.
So. But we hope to see you all there tonight, and thank you guys so much for joining us.